All right, good morning, everyone. Hopefully everybody can hear us and see us out there. Today is Thursday, June 26, 2025. This is a scheduled joint session between the Town Council and the LPA. It is 9:02. All the council members are present. The majority of the LPA is here, with some via Zoom. If they can hear me, if they could mute their stuff, that would be great. That goes a lot in here. If you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next is public comment. Jason, do we have anybody?
I have nobody signed up.
Is there anyone out there that would like to speak in public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to our items for discussion. We have one item, agenda item, is the comprehensive plan update and land development code discussions. Well, who's starting us out? Can someone who's not muted up there?
Anita.
Did someone send her a text and let her know to mute her?
I can hear you.
Can you mute your microphone for us, Anita?
Mute my microphone, I sure can.
Thank
That's a horrible thing to think about.
There, thank you. Who's starting us out? Jason Green?
Yeah. Just tap the button once.
There we go.
A suit jacket and everything.
I'll be brief. Eddie's here to talk about the comp plan and the presentation that you guys got. I think you all have it digitally, and it looks like in front of you. And we'll talk about how the land development code relates to that a little bit towards the end. We're going to try, because I guess of some of the sound issues, try to get through the presentation. So please take diligent notes on what you want to ask, so that way we can go over those. I guess it's hard to do that and the presentation at the same time.
Jason,
Yes, sir.
before you hand over the microphone, could you set the table for people who might be watching at 10,000 feet? Just kind of lay out where we've been, where we're going, what we're trying to
That's
accomplish
probably a
today?
30-minute conversation, but I can be brief.
Just very soon, very brief.
Yeah, so we are here. If you remember last fall, you guys were looking at adopting the comprehensive plan. That's been under a rewrite for quite a bit. We've gone through different versions of that. The direction from the council was, let's go back out and do a little bit more public engagement. And we kind of piggybacked on that between the land development code rewrite and the comp plan together. And Eddie's going to cover a lot of that polling and information that we gathered during that time. In your packet, you also have a summary that we've put together from kind of land development code perspective. So we're at that point where we want to get information from you, get a direction, and move forward one way or the other with the comp plan, and the land development codes get adjusted and get drafted and edited based on compliance with the comp plan.
Another 10,000 feet up.
Sure.
We're doing this because we're required to revise and update our comp plan every 10 years, is that correct?
Every 7 years you're supposed to go through a process, but you also have to extend your planning horizon. Under state law, you have to have 10, 20, and beyond planning horizon. So you should do that. It's not just the every 7 years thing. 7 years is also to comply with state law, but communities need to update their plans because they end up with a lot of outdated policies. So there's things in your plan, for example, that say we shall do something by 2010. Well, we're well beyond that, right? Or 2020. It's the date change or the direction change you're going to look at and do that. So that's a lot of things that are minor stuff, but really what we're talking about today is that vision and confirming today what is our vision, how different or similar is it from what we've had, and then moving forward with that so that we can move forward.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Eddie, long time no see.
Hi, how you doing, Mayor?
Good to see you.
Good to see everybody. Thank you to the mayor, my mayor, council members, and the LPA for having me here today. I'm going to say...
Eddie, you got to identify yourself.
Oh, hi. My name is Eddie Ning. I'm the technical vice president for the Coordinator Group. I'm also your consultant project manager working on the comprehensive plan. It's my pleasure to work on it for the last several years. A little bit to actually piggyback on Jason's comments. We are at the point where you'll see in the course of today's discussion, I'm going to ask very targeted questions of the mayor and council because part of this outreach is to get some final direction because we are at the point where we did submit on behalf of the town per your approval the first reading for the comprehensive plan. Now, when a comprehensive plan is submitted to the state, they do a state coordinated review. They look to see what's in compliance. We have received comments that were pretty minor and have been addressed from a technical standpoint. Then the council came back and said, let's do some more outreach. But under state law, we are required to do a second reading within 180 days unless extended by mutual agreement between the town and the state. Because of the extra time that the council wanted in order to go back to our residents and businesses during this process, we did come to an agreement with the state for an extension. That extension, however, for second reading, expired December 1st. So we're on a very much a ticking time clock right now. What we would like to do is present to you today what we have heard from the members of the public through the multiple workshops that we have done and the online survey, and ask you for target direction based on what we believe is the vision that the public had provided us based on the comments and feedback.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask another background question?
Sure.
Multiple times when we see things come across our particular desks for alignment with the comp plan,
Right.
the staff represents that this is more administrative item but needs to be done by the LPA and council because of the way it's written. Have all of those items, to your mind, been identified, recommended, and included in the documents? We're seeing some staff has their full input on the things they think they could handle a different way than going through the approval process?
I believe the answer to that is a yes. From a technical standpoint, the things that will be required from your horizons, 10 and 20 years that Jason noted, as well as things that the state required under 163, 177, and other parts of the Florida state statutes are or will be met on the what is proposed for second reading.
Okay.
Now, what there were come back and forth on was the aspect of magnitude, right? There are two parts to a comprehensive plan. There is what's required, and then your base minimum, and then there is the magnitude, or like a kind of a sliding scale of how far to take certain things. Now, where we have come to, I believe, a consensus as a group is the aspect of this is what we're doing to meet the minimum requirements of state law. They'll take some aspects saying we have 10-year data, 20-year data on our transportation, on our projected population, on the requirement for housing and our land use carrying capacity, which the state does check on its review. Those items will meet the requirement based on what is proposed. Going back then to, yeah, thank you. It's a good question to start off with, right? Because it's that's the framework for why what we've heard from folks. So the goal.
One thing, did you say the extension was till September 1st or December 1st?
December 1st.
December, okay, thank you.
We are in the process also of taking that additional time, and in August we'll be incorporating the technical comments from your vulnerability assessment. Those are not required from the minimum, but because you're already in that process, we believe it's prudent to help the town just incorporate something that you're already taking into account from a state grant that you received in order to prep you for, the next step, right, in an appropriate manner. So we are taking that extra step. Our goal is to ensure that those are incorporated by mid-August, so that we can come back to you in September, I believe, with a second reading. And this is so that we can make sure that things are adequately presented to the state before December 1st. And that's an important aspect of trying to make sure we move the process, because if we do not meet that deadline, you will be back to square one where we were several years ago. And we will have to resubmit entirely. under any rule changes. This is something that we would like to help you avoid. So we were asked to go back and conduct several sessions of workshop with the public and to have an online survey. We did 2 sessions at the library, the very central location, and we also tabled at the Bayside concert. In addition, we had online interactive elements. You'll see some of those in presentation, like the word cloud. Those are all actually generated by the members of the public through the online survey we had for several months. Our first library session had the highest level of engagement, and it also coincided we piggybacked on the library's reopening, so we got a lot of foot traffic, and the library is beautiful, by the way. And my sister's librarian, I digress, but so it was really great to see it reopening, from where I stand. We then went to the Bayside concert. It was a casual setting. There was a lot of folks, and we spoke with all folks, and they left comments on the board. You'll see in the picture right there, we had board printed out. They put sticky notes on preferences, and then they also wrote out their comments, which we transcribed into and looked at recurring themes. Some of these recurring themes, and we'll go into this more in subsequent slides, include everything from no high rises to protect natural assets, having a community first design, very much speaking to the small town feel. Next slide, please. These are the boards that we did in order to solicit comments. Everything from like what type of houses be allowed to how do we prioritize development, what are folks really valuing in community, and we go to and also we did a Lego exercise too, where people play with Legos and showed us what they wanted and where in the community. You go to the next slide, please. These are pictures of the feedback. You'll see that overwhelmingly, folks don't really prefer the high rises. It's not that they don't want multifamily, they just want multifamily to be on a lower scale. In addition, we find that people have really thought about it. In discussions, we got that lesson feedback too, where about the effect of Ian, and that for single family houses in the future, our comprehensive plan and the land development regulations will really consider how we can make sure that houses moving forward, your livable space is not on the ground floor. So the ground floor is garages, or houses are elevated. So that is, while there are some preferences from folks there, you see that the overwhelming amount of dots on that really point to the nature of the design of the neighborhood that we should be looking for in the future. Next, please. We took some resident comment that we got from the board. We typed them up and really just provided for both you and the public to see what your neighbors are saying, as well as something that really just spoke to me was about contributors versus takers, right? We know it's a community that needs a balance. The tourism industry does help support our local businesses, but it needs to be done in a way that it doesn't take away from your quality of life. There needs to be a balance where it's supporting your business, it supports the local economic, and there is a distinct difference between someone who is contributing to your community versus coming in and taking from your community. And that's actually a comment echoed by, actually comes directly from your residents. They both want to look at street and roadway network to accommodate walking and bicycling. They want viable options. It's not just about building infrastructure, it's about being able to use that in a way that fits into their day-to-day life and what they want to do with it, relaxation and being able to enjoy the reason they moved to Fort Myers Beach or grew up here and stayed here in the first place, right? So next, please.
Hold on a second. What would you describe as viable? What do you think their premise was when they said that word?
When you think about the word viable, it means that I'll give you an example. I work for another community where they put in a bike lane and no one used that bike lane. Why? Because it was the bike lane to nowhere. It connected between houses, but it didn't actually connect to, say, public or the bank. So I didn't connect to like the park either. And so it's like, why did we build it? No one's using it. Well, no one's using it because it connects you to maybe your neighbor's house, and you're going to drive there anyway on your way to drop off stuff before you head to the park or whatever you're going to do during the day, right? So
Jim, that's
connections
exact-
have to make sense.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's exactly what that road by Seagate. It's a
Road to nowhere.
nowhere.
Yep.
And why that's in the comp plan, I have no idea. I mean, it's a road
Great
to
point,
nowhere.
great point.
Yeah. So things have to connect.
Well, you gotta remember that was 25 years ago.
I know, but it's still in there, Dan. It's a road to nowhere. It makes no sense. It's not viable. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And so there's aspects of that. There's of course a lot of feedback. There's this community that's very, very much interested in preserving or protecting our natural resources. That's in your existing comprehensive plan. That the attitude is also reflected in what the public has provided back to us and feedback. Next, please. Now, online survey. We give you a brief overview of the online survey. We had 118 respondents. This was something that was sent out through the town newsletter. We had QR codes at each event. We also printed out and laminated QR codes and told folks, please take this and go to your next door neighbor, take a few extra. We want as many responses as possible. Based on, the survey response, there's a mix there. Their top concerns really are traffic congestion, especially about getting on and off the island. That's something that we didn't just hear in the survey, but we heard in person as well. Healthcare access was actually something that we got a lot of feedback on, both in the survey and during like one-on-one conversations with the public, particularly about having even like urgent care or like doctor's offices in Ireland, being able to ensure that we can either attract them or have a land use regulations that make it easy for them to be able to locate on the island. Not a surprise, folks are definitely still concerned about post-hurricane recovery and so forth. We have posed a lot of questions about transportation, about future development, community services. There's a lot of concerns about comments about future development. Next, please, and how that should look.
So the lowest category on here was tourists. Do you know the context they were asked that question?
Pardon?
The lowest responses were on tourists as what's important to you. Do you know the context of what the question was on that? It's an interesting thing with the amount of economic impact it's provided to the island.
What are your possible concerns for a future development? They're not concerned about the tourists coming in. They're concerned about the traffic and the height in particular.
Okay.
But really what we found in talking with individuals was that the height was really tied in a lot in terms of, is it going to block my view of the beach? They don't really care as much about some of the height on the inland side. They care about the height on the beach side, is what I got from my conversation. The other aspect of that was that they recognize that we do have some areas where there are existing high-rises, so they're not necessarily get rid of those because they're existing, but also, a lot of feedback would limit to where it's appropriate, right? The other aspect was that we heard time and time again and saw also in the open responses was, you have a comprehensive plan, you're setting a limit, stick to it. That's something that we overwhelmingly heard from the responses, that if you're going to write these rules, and you got to stick to the rules. Just reporting back what they're saying right there. We also asked aspect of what kind of civic, natural, and cultural resources you think this town should prioritize. dealing with traffic and making sure the park and the beach, you see the word cloud right there, are pretty much some of the most major responses. Recreation environment are really up there. The library actually came up quite a few times, so they really love our library. Next, please. You know, these are some of the, you know, examples of the comments received, like open in response to like transportation challenges, getting on and off the island. That's right there. We not only saw that on the survey, we saw that in person on the yellow sticky notes. Parking is, again, not a surprise. We talked about this ad nauseum for years throughout the process. This reconfirms what we've already have advised on. What we're finding is that a lot of these items are consistent with the approaches that we had in our third reading comprehensive plan. Everything from thinking about how do we deal with potential for future ferry service as part of a comprehensive approach to transportation, to looking at how we can think about how we address parking, making sure we beautify certain things even along the roadway that the vice mayor actually had brought up during one meeting because he'd heard from our residents. Things like that have been repeated in this process. We looked at the visioning as well. Next, please. What type of business should the town try to attract? I'm not surprised that multiple things come into mind as, in terms of medical side, like physical therapy, active health related fields that we talked about earlier. They do want to make sure we retain our restaurants and have the smaller retail. You know, specific to, I got to some of the comments I heard, it wasn't like about having the big market, but even being able to attract those small, like corner bodegas that are meaningful, they can just walk to. I heard that a lot too. It's something that they don't want to necessarily drive to pick up stuff. They want to be able to walk to the corner and say, okay, I just need a couple of things just to bring home. You know, I'm making like guacamole or something, I need an avocado. Like that sort of thing. I actually heard that one in particular that stuck in my mind. But you know, you see personal services in there, right? Dry cleaners, laundromats. Really no surprise because we've been hearing this for a number of years and throughout the process. Next, please. What type of services do we do on the island? Now in the future, again, we hear the same thing, right? Not surprised. Bank, restaurant, medical, personal services are really high on the list. Grocery, barber, like, you know, hair salons. Very consistent. Next. So we took that all together, and from a visioning standpoint, we said, what is a potential visioning statement? And I want to present this to you for you guys to just kind of sit on into the end of presentation and say, does this fit? And the way we kind of want to encapsulate the story, because it's about the story of where you want to go, right? That's where a comprehensive plan really also does. It's about where you want to be in 20 years from now. And what we believe we heard was the Fort Myers Beach of the future is a safe, multi-generational community where residents can grow older with our family together with the town, peacefully and quietly enjoying scenic views of the Gulf and the beaches, while still being able to find good eats, experience, and music locally when one desires. Our community is one that has transportation choices and it's easy to get around, with great local opportunities for lifelong learning, and it's backed by strong civic services like the library, and along with personal services and experience like doctors, banks, entertainment, groceries, and others. The Fort Myers Beach of the future is resilient, having learned the lessons of Ian and other natural events. We care deeply about our natural resources. This is our slice of paradise. We are willing to share it, but only in balanced ways that contribute positively towards our overall quality of life. That positive contribution here that we're talking about is, we know that businesses have a bottom line. There's a balance between what we as a town can provide in terms of sustaining those businesses to make sure they exist. And we know that the tourist industry provides them that income that makes it viable for those businesses to continue to exist. but there, you know, the trade-off there, right? It has to be balanced in a way that allows those businesses to exist, but doesn't overwhelm our neighborhoods, particularly our single-family neighborhoods. And that's what the comprehensive plan approach is consistent with this, because it tries to corral those uses and that activity in specific areas so that we can try to preserve that quiet, small town feel in certain parts of the town. Now, if this isn't what you believe the vision is supposed to be, then we have to understand what the difference is in that statement so that we can go back and say, how do you make the comprehensive plan consistent with a revision of that? But this is based, I'm taking even word from this, from the word clouds, from the sticky notes that we got on the board in the conversation. So that's where that statement really generates from. Next, please. I see the images here because I think that, you know, I said it verbally, right? But there's also, actually, can we go back one? But these are not actually specific places. We did a combination of either renderings or AI-generated rendering in order to, and we used prompts that are based on not only the vision, but actually words that were used by your public in providing what they believe the future of the city, the town should be. And these are the type of images that AI spit out or we have, you know, generated as a result. Beautiful, low scale, small beachfront Main Street, you know, that housing with, you know, two-story parking in the bottom that I talked about. Next, please. Oh, go back one. Walkable, places where you can sit and just chat with your neighbors, the open space aspect, good landscaping, you know, preserving that, what, you know, people typically characterize as small town character community identity, particularly with beachfront, barrier island communities, like the ones I work with elsewhere in the state, whether it's Palm Beach or Key Biscayne, Key West, Islamorada, and others that we've worked with. Limiting the high density development and promoting alternative transportation. Enhancing our parks and public spaces to community hubs. Again, that's aspect of balance, right? Next, please. The thematic aspect, you know, growth is acceptable to align with the town's character. It's about that place, right? That sense of place, that sense of community where you can gather together, enjoy that bit of music. I mean, that concert was that small concert was packed. It was like there were a lot of folks really enjoying that. Again, like human scale development, respect the scale of the town, preservation of our natural and cultural assets like Mound House, for example. And next, please. And so, you know, we looked at the thematic aspect and how they apply them back to the comprehensive plan initially. We're finding that is pretty hit the mark. I mean, regarding investment, promoting cultural awareness, looking at rebuilding parks, dealing with traffic mobility, and looking at what planning you should be doing. It's really more about the application at this point. And that, but this is, again, if you got to accept that based on what we got from the public, and what we're saying the vision is based on what the words the public gave us, is what direction the town council is directing us as the consultant and staff team working on this to move forward with. Next, please. So the last step again is to really make sure that we're integrating the findings correctly so that we can finally finalize the comprehensive plan and then move on to assisting your staff with the land development regulation updates that are needed to help keeping the town move forward. With that, hopefully that's a brief enough presentation.
Well, let's start with you, Jim. Let's just kind of go around the table. If you have any questions for Eddie or Jason or comments based on his presentation. I know it's difficult to hear you, so it's one person talking at a time. It's much easier.
Can we go back to push back on the visioning statement?
Which one?
Yeah, it would be,
That paragraph that he did.
yeah, the paragraph one.
Yep.
Yeah, that one.
Okay, if the playbook is our comprehensive plan, and the plan is like the 10,000-foot view of it, but there has to be flexibility to get deviations to some of those things in the plan. So specifically, I think the community height has been a big issue. And the deviations from the house being whatever public benefits there are, is that going to be addressed in the comp plan or in the land development code?
It could be addressed in both, something that we're tracking together with staff, and I'm doing on the state level because I'm at the president-elect for the American Planning Association Florida chapter. I am also the head of the Legislative Policy Committee for the planners in the state. We're concerned about Senate Bill 180. So, we believe the governor is likely to sign. He has 6 more days to determine whether or not he's going to veto that aspect. But 180 provides for certain aspects of what's more restrictive, right? The other thing that we're looking at, we're concerned is something that has been signed, and that is Senate Bill 1730, which is an amendment to the Live Local Act. The combination of the both means that you need to consider that the comprehensive plan has certain aspects of maximum and bonuses in order to navigate these different pieces of state legislation to create that flexibility that you're talking about. From that standpoint, and I'm sorry I'm giving a complicated answer, but it's to create an aspect where you have a base minimum that is going to adhere to Live Local, a bonus component that you're talking about that will allow for a maximum, and that to be reflected first in a maximum approach that is clearly distinguishable with that bonus aspect within your comprehensive plan, and then applied correctly in your land development regulations.
Are you suggesting that it would be a point system, or would it be
within the
subjective? Or?
In the within the comprehensive plan, you should avoid generally a point system, because you should have that in your land development regulations to create that flexibility. The comprehensive plan sets the overall 10,000-foot parameter. I'll give you an example. I'm working with another city on their comprehensive plan update, Miami Garden, and they have as a basis for their corridor development, we have a base minimum of 16 dwelling units per acre. But the corridor they want to grow because they have transit coming in, like have rail coming in, right? So normally that looks to about 80 or 90 dwelling units per acre. They still kept the base amount of 16 and they said, if you provide us with X, Y, Z, we will at our discretion raise it up on a bonus basis. And that gives them negotiating power as well to run through this. Now, how much you want to kind of wrangle with that on a land development regulation standpoint is purely a policy decision. I'm working with various cities across the state. I've seen it both ways, right? I've seen it where it's really clearly defined, because that makes it easy for you to make those determinations on the basis of finding the facts as the council, mayor and council, right? There are other times where it's a little bit more, okay, let us know because we want to have that discretion. Those cities tend to trust that their staff is empowered to make those negotiations on the best path town, and then the mayor and council or mayor commission then goes back and says, hey, we agree with this, or no, this is what we'd like to see a little bit more tweaked, are you willing to kind of discuss this further? And becomes then an iterative process. There is no right or wrong answer based on my professional experience of working with these different types of communities, save that the correct way is how to get up the apparatus by which you work together with the staff and the folks who are trying to create that investment in your community in a way that makes sense, right? That's kind of my caveat from the statewide experience. Did that hopefully answer your question a little bit more? Yeah.
And Jason Green talked about the land development codes are going to spell some of that out. And so I think what we want is, what you're talking about flexibility, is your comp plan can have policies that direct your code or direct your community to do certain things, right? And so one of the things, just trying to make an example to connect these things, because a lot of people get confused comp plan versus land development code. Comp plan, you may say policies that we want to encourage or want the land development codes to encourage and allow more uses such as medical services or what have you, right? That's one of the example items that we got from the public. Then in the land development code, you make the decisions on how you're carrying that out. And that may be increasing the square footage of those uses allowed. It may be reducing the hurdles that you're making them more permitted uses in zoning districts rather than special exceptions. There's different tools that you can do in the code to implement those policies from the comprehensive plan. So that's that connection, and I think obviously we're a community that's got challenging sites. They're almost all unique, but it's the tools that we use to put in the code if the comp plan directs us to do that. Does that make sense? So deviations, changes in development standards. If you want to encourage a use, maybe a policy in the comp plan says allow reduction of parking for certain preferred uses. And then in the code, we can say medical uses are going to have reduction in parking because that's something that you want to encourage. That might be an example of the play between the comp plan and the development code.
Question. Well, I think we are searching for a direction as to height because we are not following the comp plan or anything at this point, and we need to have some direction that we feel that we are representing what our rules are here in approving projects so that the public knows that we are supporting, you know, what we're supposed to be supporting.
So I'm going to circle back to that. Our first mission today is to get this vision kind of statement, either yes, we like what it says, it doesn't say specifics enough, or no, we don't like it and we want to rewrite it, right? Because each of those paths take us somewhere else. It's a great question of what you're asking because, as Eddie was talking about, your comp plan and being aware of all that's going on with state legislation, all that stuff, setting your minimums and maximums is the basic minimum for a comprehensive plan, and that's floor area ratio, uses, right? Generally guiding those uses to categories, all of that, right? And then typically your height and your other details and the nuances of FAR and those other things are carried out in your land development code through zoning districts, through conditional uses, special exceptions, through other types of vehicles. Right now, the way it's set up is the council ultimately decides on what those answers are, what you're asking.
Right.
That's on a case-by-case basis right now, and really depends on where is it, what's around it, what's being asked for, what's that give and take. So that's up to you guys as a group to decide what other criteria you want to put. We also have to be very careful about restrictions that don't exist today, adopting something that becomes more restrictive, right? We don't want to do that. So
that isn't going to be defined today.
No, but there's ways to create policy that bleed into your land development codes and land development codes. Like we want to create the bonus point thing we've talked about a couple years ago. You guys decided, as a council, decided not to go that way at the time, thought about it, but it's a nuance that can be incorporated into the ultimate decision making. There's other ways to do it. It's not just bonus points, there's versions of that similar, that sliding scale. I don't know if you're saying this, I'm going to say, but maybe more defined criteria of how to get, that's a way to go. Another way to go is case by case, site by site. So.
Well, I understand case by case because, I mean, we also guarantee that for a building that has been demolished, that they can have the same number of units. But does the same number of units have to be 3 times the size or 4 times the size of what they were? Or can we say, you can have your number of units, but you also have to stay more reasonable. Everything doesn't have to be 4,000 square feet.
Yeah, I think, so the policy, is the regulation currently in the code can be rethought. You just got to be careful that you're not all of a sudden taking something away that's in your code, right? So that point is, if you introduce a way to, right now it says you can't, under a certain regulation and a process, you can't have larger square footage for rebuilding post-storm, right? You could introduce a way to allow that flexibility or that option, another process there's ways to introduce that where there's other than just coming back through a RPD or CPD, that sort of thing.
Right.
There's ways that you can do that. I don't see that as being more restrictive. I see that as creating options. That's different than saying we're not going to allow you to do that at all.
Right.
Or you don't have post-disaster, those types of things we
Right.
don't want to do.
Jason.
But that's different than the height, that's different than, there's two different things here. There's kind of infill stuff that you're talking about and replacing, and then there's new development.
But if I'm not mistaken, over the last couple of years, it has been your guys' stance that getting that granular in the comprehensive plan is not necessarily a good idea, specifically when it comes to things like Senate Bill 180.
Correct.
Once you put it in there, you're not going to be able to take it back out.
Right.
Should
Yeah,
something else
so-
happen. So
Yes.
I think wordsmithing the comprehensive plan to maybe lead down that road that directs you into a certain direction into the land development code where you can put the policies in place to do what I think everybody is kind of referring to.
Right.
But not getting that granular in the comprehensive plan, to me, it makes more sense because I believe Senate Bill 180 is going to be signed.
Yes.
And what we have in place now is pretty much going to be set in stone how you want to. My understanding is you'll be able to increase it, but you can't decrease it.
Yeah, and I'll have that as a comment to make, but I would say it's always a challenge writing land development codes if you don't have some direction from the comp plan. And I'm working in a community now where we're literally taking every land development code change and tying it to a policy in the comprehensive plan because the public and that commission wants to see that, right? They're at that level where you don't make a change in land development code until you show us why. Not all comp plans and not all efforts are like that, right? That gets into very, very, very detailed justification reasons. So it is helpful somewhat to have policy that say, hey, go make sure medical uses, as an example, medical uses are taken care of and allowed as many places as possible so we can have that service to the public, right? It's helpful to change your code if you have that policy. But yes, to your point, the granular, I'll let Eddie talk about this.
And I
but
don't
the
want to speak
granular
for Jane,
part.
but what I think I hear you're saying, Jane, is there a way in the comprehensive plan to wordsmith it to say, whatever, 25-story buildings can't be next to a residential neighborhood?
Yes, but you see, but like right now, let's use that as an example. You have the opportunity to have a taller building if you're next to tall buildings when you're rebuilding, right? But it doesn't give any guidance of what other criteria you're using to evaluate that. It would be something like that might be more helpful to give you guys guidance in that example.
I think the problem is that the public responds to how we approve things as, why aren't you following the comp plan? And we need direction from the comp plan to feel like we can do things properly so that the public can see that we are following the comp plan.
Talking about what you're saying, Mayor, actually already resonates with me because we've already done that with aspects of the comprehensive plan. For example, the height, gradient aspect. It's already in what has been proposed, and in such a way that it defers to the little itty bitty grains of like sand aspect to it in the land development regulation, and to retain the higher level. So it is in there. So what this is telling me is that our approach is actually consistent with what you're saying right now, which that's good news for me, because that means that I just have to do, certain cursory checks on what, to make sure. But I can assure you, based on what I'm hearing, then even for that example, that it is pretty consistent with your direction from before. So
Yeah, I think some of the issue, Jane, is people want a checklist of are you approving this or that, and that's more the land development code side of it.
right.
But if you're consistent with the comp plan, what does that mean, right? That usually means if you're meeting the bare minimum of the state requirements, you have minimum and maximums, and you're identifying categories, future land use categories, and which uses can go in there, and you're mapping it and preserving environment and this and that, you're meeting the comprehensive plan.
Right.
Your comprehensive plan has more conversation about architectural and style and community, what it looks like and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably where people are coming from is, why aren't we checking the box saying it meets this, this, and this? The land development code is more the technical side of that.
So we removed quite a bit of that in the revision.
So
was that
do they want more in the comp plan? That's a question. There's a
I think that the public just needs to understand the comp plan so
Well,
that,
right, so we try.
education.
Yes, so they can be as thorough as you want, or some comp plans have things like height and other things like that in them, but those are usually on a category base because it's a unique category, like an urban center kind of thing. They want that downtown to have a feel for it, so they put more in there. A lot of times it's mostly in the land development code. Right now your policies are set up where ultimately you've got standards, but then it's a case by case ultimately on the zoning side. Is what you're saying. That's why you don't have a lot of future land use map amendments. You have a lot of rezonings, but you don't have a lot of future land use map amendments. And I think with the new one, you know, even less chance of having more of those. Well,
Okay.
maybe.
Yeah.
Jim, any more questions for Eddie at this point? Well, obviously you probably have more, but.
I guess just a follow-up then. The development agreements that have come, I think they were originally anticipated to be small developments, but they have now morphed into being large developments. Is that going to be addressed in the revision to the development code?
So that's in the land, or that's in your, not land development code, that's in your code of ordinances, but no, not in the comp plan.
No,
But that's a decision council
Yeah.
to revise that if necessary.
That sort of item is too granular to normally put in a comprehensive plan because that usually is too, too detailed
Yeah.
for a comprehensive plan. You want to address that on an administrative basis and on a land development.
on a development
basis.
code.
Yeah.
So to follow up on Jim's comment about development agreements, we're at day 1002 since the storm. I don't want to be sitting here at day 4002 and we still can't develop small lots. So in your opinion, in your professional opinion, how do we energize these small lots? Do we give them more FAR? Do we give them more? What can we do to activate these small lots? Because this report here, everybody wants doctor's offices, banks, all that stuff, but the reality is none of these small lots are doing anything, nor are they even being sold, because the numbers just don't work for these small business owners. And if we want to have these nodes, and we want to have small business on this island, we've got to figure out a way to activate these small lots. I mean, it's reality. So what can we do? Is it the comp plan? Is it the LDC? Is it bonus point?
I want to jump in there a little bit because I'll disagree with that statement. There's nothing in the comprehensive plan or land development code that's preventing anyone from developing their lot. Look at the salty crab.
I'm not saying
they were able to come in and ask for more than they were allowed by right, were granted it, and are able to make the numbers work in a building back on a very small lot. So I take offense when people say that we have to change something because they can't make it work. Salty crab has shown they can make it work. Small lots can be developed. Now, maybe they're not going to be developed to meet your ROI or another business owner's ROI, but it doesn't mean that they can't be developed and be viable. I don't disagree with you. Is there ways that we can say we don't have to go through 17 different deviations to ask for something because it's a small lot, whether it's parking, whether it's, so that saves money and maybe you can speed up some time. But I completely disagree with the fact that unless we change our comprehensive plan and land development code to allow you to have more by right, just by giving away stuff by right, to me, makes zero sense. And I don't think that's what the community wants.
Question, because I'm just asking, how do we activate more of these lots?
Sure.
I think it comes down to the policy approach when it comes to economic development, right? It's essentially an economic development question. Now, from an economic development standpoint, when you're trying to bring in these businesses, first aspect is, can you build the building? The building of that building creates that space. Having the flexibility to go in and say, we have a certain amount of square footage, and let the market decide how to go with that. It's usually an initial first step. Past that then, it's a combination of whether or not you change those regulations, because the question then is, are there barriers to the creation of that space? And this is a separate question from, is there a barrier to create that space versus is there a barrier to maintain or fill that space based on market conditions, right? So different communities look at it differently, right? They have different approaches that when you go around you see, hey, okay, I can build a building. Where I live, we have these former warehouses right next to City Hall. and they were vacant for years because they didn't have rules on how they could subdivide those, the interior in a way that makes sense for the sizes of the business to rent appropriately for the size of business they want to come in. So that was a minor tweak that was needed. And in another community I worked with, they had that space, but the rent per square footage was too high. So they looked at, can we leverage funds, either from helping them with assistance for grants and having that dedicated staff member to it for business development, or creating a business improvement district or a CRA, and looking at tax increment finance to say, okay, can we create different economic development programs? So I've given you a very nuanced answer because there are different approaches from a policy standpoint. One that's rooted in the physical nature of what you allow that creates that space versus the filling of that space and the attraction of that business, which is both a combination of the cost to build that space because they gotta pay those construction loans back, right? To the mezzanine loan and so forth, by getting that rent, and if the business in question can't pay that rent, how do you bridge that gap? Is it you find a way that the process is easier so that they can they have a little bit more maneuverability on the rent?
Stop right there, because that's kind of what I was getting at. I agree with Scott.
Yeah.
What is the easiest way, because I think we're going to get into the weeds here if we keep going down,
Right.
what rent's going to cost, they're getting into the weeds. What I think we're concerned with, and I don't want to speak for Scott, but these small businesses that have these small lots. I haven't spoken to a developer that hasn't thought that 2.5 FAR would work for any lot. Not one single developer has told me that number doesn't work. Has a ceiling, which would fall within the comprehensive plan, right? I think what we're trying to get at is how can we make it so that, like we did with the variances, if you go through the LPA, you don't have anybody object to it, you don't have to go through the time expense to go through council. Is there a way in the land development code to be able to do that for these smaller lots that maybe are in certain zoning districts that allow you, if you're at a 1.0 FAR, I don't have to come in and ask for a deviation and the expense to go to a 2 or 2.5. It allows that flexibility for them to come in. It's not necessarily giving something away because they're going to come in and ask for it anyway. But how do you encourage them to be able to come in and want to do what they want to do without increasing what we currently have?
Right, and ultimately they'll come to the land development code, and that's through a selection of zoning and how uses are handled. It's through scale. What is an appropriate cutoff where it's permitted by right, or you don't have to do more parking, or your landscaping doesn't have to be to the top notch type of thing. But then something triggers where it does have to go through a plan development type or deviations, that sort of. There's a way, there's tools to do that.
Through the comprehensive
Threshold, through the land development code.
Whether it's a bank or whether it's a, is there wording in there that you can put into the comprehensive plan that will allow?
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about earlier, where if you want that direction to ensure that the code gets adopted, and you can point to something in code and say, we're doing that because then yes, you can do policy in the comprehensive plan.
And I think, Scott, is that kind of what I think you were trying to get?
So here's the other curveball. So we've been talking about this coastal protection system, seawall, whatever you want to call it. So let's give an example. Let's say we approve Joe's Bar, and it's a FAR of 2.0, but we all know that down below is parking per the rules. But now the seawall gets built, it drops from a BE zone to an A zone, coastal A, but he still can't activate that downstairs because if he does, then the FAR goes too high. So how do we write that so when we do get this coastal protection system, I think everybody's on board with that. How do we write that so that these guys can today build the bar and downstairs is parking, but when the zone changes and they can activate that down the lower level, how do we write that where he can do that?
Okay, so I'm going to wade into some unpopular language here. So let's have this conversation, right? The way to do that is increase your max. And then you have to stick to standards of how you get to that max, right? When I say that, everybody freaks out. We've had this conversation for years, Mayor, right? 2 years ago when we were writing the comp plan, having that same conversation, it's establish what your maximum really community feel is, and then the criteria and the ways you get to there, you can control through the comp plan and land development code. everybody's afraid of a higher number because they think everybody's going to get it, right?
Right.
So that's the conversation you're starting, which is, well, maybe we do want a little, is 2.5 enough to accommodate all of that? I don't know. It depends on the
I don't know
site.
either, but
So
how do we write it so that
you,
a lot of these people don't want to, they know that a bar.
and if that's a specific example you're talking
Yeah.
about to allow, then, well, one, you're gonna, my thoughts on it, you're gonna encourage maximum development excluding that, which you're then saying in the future you're gonna have more anyway, right? So you're not really limiting them in the future at all.
Well,
You're saying.
because what I'm trying to look at this practically, right?
Right.
You can use it as bar, let's just say it was a medical facility that is built 2 stories, built to current code, but to Scott's point, they put in the mitigation wall, coastal construction, whatever you want. Once it's approved and that box is the box is still the box, right? Now you can say it's a number that's going in if they're gonna fill that in on the lower level, but at the end of the day, does it really matter to the public? Because you're not technically increasing,
Sure.
you're not increasing the footprint of the building.
Right.
So how can you put it into the comprehensive plan that would maybe, or maybe it doesn't belong there, maybe it belongs like land development, what you say?
You can get
if you, you know, what I'm thinking is if maybe it's as simple as wording, if you go from a hazard flood zone outside of that, that triggers your ability to be able to do that without having to come back and say,
Sure.
I'm exceeding the 2.5 FAR,
Right.
which is the max now.
So you're still setting a max, but there's nuances to language, yes, that
That
you
would
can
allow,
put in
that would
there.
entice you to be able to.
Correct. And the challenge is limiting it to certain
Yeah, I
circumstances.
don't want to be the wild, wild west, but I want the guys that, you know, we all agree, we want stuff, we want shovels in the ground.
Sure.
But if we give these guys the ability to say, hey, look, you can build today, in the future, if we get that coastal
Sure.
protection system, you're grandfathered in.
Yeah, I think the challenge is the limitations on that, the geographic, where it is, who gets it, who doesn't, what situation does happen, but most of it's probably in a very limited geographic area that you're talking about anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but it does spread across the Estero Boulevard, right? So
Right.
if you do that coastal protection system on the entire island, that's going to change the flood zones for everybody across the street, which opens up these nodes, if that's what you want to call them. It opens up the ability to be able to build something that meets what the vision of the comprehensive plan is.
2 different ways that could be approached. It's really just one line in the comprehensive plan. One way is to do it by area, which some communities do. The other way is just to have a blanket statement along the lines of, for that particular example, the ground floor shall not count against the FAR if specific conditions are met, and you list those conditions. This becomes a checklist, and you apply that into the comprehensive plan. Either way is permissible, and both ways have been used by other communities. One or the other, not in combination sometimes, because that makes things a little bit more difficult, but you can go either route.
And does that single line statement cover, obviously, if it's a VE zone, it's a high hazard flood zone, they're not going to be able to build that lower level anyway, so they couldn't implement that.
You could we could be writing in a way that doesn't get overly granular, and you could say that, you know, it's that do not count, you know, toward the FAR if specific criteria as determined within the code are met. So, you know, there's a way we can word it that way, and then you have the flexibility in the future to say, okay, we are going to be flexible enough to see what the conditions change at the community. We want certain things to come into play. Maybe the coastal construction line changes, right? Because beat occlusion, you know, all this other stuff. You know, there's a certain way to write it. We'll take a look.
I think we understand, we're talking specifically about commercial, but in my mind, I'm looking at how does this benefit residents, right? Right. So if you're building a house, now you have that same ability. You would still, in my mind, have that same ability, which has to be breakaway walls now and can't be livable space. It now allows you to get a bigger footprint without having to go bigger, wider, ask for things. So it can work for residential as much as it could work for.
Yeah, but I just want to be careful on the residential commercial differences. Is commercial has a lot more flexible options under National Flood Insurance Policy and the program, all those programs, than residential does. Residential doesn't. Residential can't flood-proof. They can't flood now because they can't flood-proof the bottom level. Commercial can. Commercial can do dry flood proofing in an A zone. Residential can't. They still are limited to the uses below flood. They have to elevate. So let's. Yes. So, but the other curveball to this is you also have something that you don't regulate, which is coastal construction line. You have elevations that are mandated on your coast. The flood maps are almost irrelevant when it comes to a portion of your island because of the DEP mandated elevations and rules and regulations that go with that too. So there's options, there's opportunities that we can create that opportunity in the policy-wise. I just want everybody to understand it's not a magic silver bullet for everything. It's all going to depend on location, situation, and all that. But activating the street, which you've heard that term multiple times over the years, that's what your comp plan now calls for. It changed during your plan because of obviously floods moving, or flood zones moving around. That's still in play. But yes, ultimately we would love to activate the street and create more pedestrian-friendly uses. So to Eddie's point, yes, you can carve out some things, you can limit it to geography and land use categories, you can create some opportunity for the future where it doesn't get misused. Whether it's able to be used because of those other factors is to be seen.
It's about frameworking.
Right. I don't know that Salty Crab is going to be able to do that. That's that's a site that we could look at as an example. But
Well, you don't know that the zone will change anyway, right? We don't know.
Correct.
We don't know yet.
We don't know. We don't
At
know.
least if
Yes.
it has the flexibility within the comp plan to be able to do it.
Right.
We're thinking forward
Right.
Sure.
instead of thinking 25
Well,
years.
for providing options, this could
Yeah.
potentially provide an option.
Yeah, and I mean, because we're doing the land development code side, in tangent with this, and I've been thinking about that for years. I mean, we have things in our code that we've been wanting to change. Landscaping, for example, the amount of landscaping you're required by code to put in if you redevelop a site, if you add 5% more square footage to a building, all of a sudden you got to bring the entire site up to compliance with the code, and there's certain requirements that you can't do that with on some of our sites. I think that's probably to your point, Scott. There's things in that code that we've been waiting to change that I think will benefit us, especially the small businesses, at least as an opportunity.
Right.
Is the reality of what Eddie talked about of the real world of finance and market and I don't know.
Eddie nailed it on the head. We all have to get going on the CRA. I mean, that's crucial.
There's another tool, but I deal with this in many communities that we're dealing with. Like, why don't we have more of this or that? And unfortunately, the answer sometimes is you don't have the market for that, and the market doesn't want to be there. But it doesn't mean you can't create tools that allow that to happen if the population and the market want something to happen. So I'm with you on that. There's a number of things we've been thinking about for the code for now to implement in tangent with the comp plan.
I want to make sure we bring it back to kind of the central reason we're here today, and that is to ensure that from my end, I have adequate and appropriate direction from the council. What I'm hearing, and feel free to correct me, is that you want to make sure that we have a balanced framework that provides for the ability for the land development regulation to tackle those specific nuances on a flexible basis, including on items like how to deal with the ground floor. There's a way we can write that or make sure that the wording is appropriate for that. A lot of it, I believe, already is based on my recollection of specific wording that we put in there based on prior direction. But I just want to make sure we have the appropriate final direction from you all, because we want to make sure we complete it appropriately and in a timely manner, given the time constraints that we now have to meet the state's requirement based on our agreement. All right.
Dan?
Yeah. Yeah, very fine. I'm scared the hell out of me.
All rise.
Go ahead and it's gone.
So something that I'd like to hear Eddie or Jason comment on is, you're talking about commercial properties, but if that coastal protection system were to go island-wide, is there an opportunity for single-family residences to utilize their ground floor, which could, of course, increase our ability to have available rentals for folks? I'd just like to hear somebody say something about that. And then I have one other thing to
I can
say.
make it work.
I'll give you an example.
Like a general.
I'm trying to give you an example, Jason, because I've been thinking about it, and I understand how you're saying commercially it can, but let's say you're in an area that you have a house that you want to have it's a bed and breakfast, and now the downstairs is going to be a coffee shop, or it's going to be something that you could dry flood-proof, because now it's becoming a commercial versus a residential, even though it's still residential above, but it's commercial below. I know we had talked about this before. Would this line in the comprehensive plan allow that?
Or better yet, Dan, if somebody's got a house, somebody's built a new house and wants to have a viable annual rental on the ground floor, You know, we're missing that right now in a huge way. We're missing rentals for people who want to live on Fort Myers Beach. Plenty for people who want a vacation, but for people to live on Fort Myers Beach, does this clause or addition allow for something like that?
I don't think so, but I think Dan's example was probably an opportunity. You know, we got to be careful of encroachment of commercial uses in residential neighborhoods, but if it's in an appropriate place, if it's around these nodes, maybe there's an opportunity there where, like Eddie's talking about, it doesn't count as FAR because
Okay.
you don't get into a commercial building, because once you do commercial, it becomes a commercial building.
So there's no way residentially you could dry flood-proof your lower level if you're outside the VE zone?
Correct. Your living space has to be above.
And that comes from the state?
That's a federal requirement.
Okay.
Yeah,
If
not
you,
even a state.
well,
Storage
It's a stupid requirement.
for you to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, which involves
So let's
insurance.
say I have enough money that I'm paying cash for my house and I'm building it, and I'm not going to be in the National Flood Insurance
No,
Program?
because you as a community are.
You tried that?
No, you as a community are, and so everybody has to have the same rules apply to them.
Yep.
Okay, well, Jason, can you put back the screen that has your visioning statement that you want to comment on? Because I'd just like to ask you to contemplate one thing, and now I can't see it.
But I think, Dan, your example might be something that we can nuance in our language.
That would help if it's terrible or corridor, but
So what that ultimately helps is, as you have a node that may transition and is kind of residential mix with commercial, really is going to become more commercial over time, it allows that site to be redeveloped and reused quicker, and some profit to be gained from redeveloping that building, rather than tear something down and build something. So that's an interesting concept to incorporate, yes.
So, can you hear me?
yes.
So, your vision statement, I just wondered, can you put that back up on the screen for just 1 second? It's just that first pair, okay, here. So, to me, it's a little bit static, and listen, I think what you guys have done is phenomenal. I made a lot of notes when I was reading the packet, and there are just some really great statements. And I like this. I just feel like that first paragraph is static, and I wonder if it could say something like, the Fort Myers Beach of the future is a safe, multi-generational community where we welcome visitors and where residents, new and old, can grow with our families and friends, blah, blah, blah. Just to recognize that there's always new residents, this is to me static, saying,
Right.
hey, all of us in the room, we're gonna get older, and thank goodness we can be here. So, just so there's a little more movement in it, do you know what I mean?
I defer to everyone on the LP and the Mayor and Council.
It makes sense to me. It covers more.
We will incorporate that text and move accordingly.
And we understand what you're saying, yes, thank you.
Yeah, because then it ties into the end where you bring up the visitors again, saying, you know, we just want it to be in a balanced way. Okay, thank you.
Jim, I'm still on you.
I'm passing the baton,
John.
Well, to follow on what Anita was saying, I was thinking that the statement in the first one, it talks about scenic views of the Gulf, but it doesn't talk about the natural resources that we have there. And I know we talked a lot about turtles and birds, but they're really, I think, the backbone of why everybody is on this beach. I mean, there's two different parts to this beach. There's the natural resources and then the entertainment resources, right? And they have to live in concert with each other. So I would like to see something that includes the environment of living on a barrier island that I think is missing right now. It's views of the Gulf and the beaches, but it's actually the enjoyment of nature, I think, that we're talking about. And I'm not a strident environmentalist, but it's, I think, a very important part of this community.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is we need to have a water component, because we have to be for clean water, and it's absolutely part of our heart and soul. Because without clean water, we're nothing. So, yeah.
So, Eddie's coming for asking us. What do you mean by, I know what you mean by that. How do you think your comp plan and your policies adopted locally will do that?
I don't know, that's why we have a consultant.
Yes, well,
I want to see,
The wording.
Yeah.
The simple wording, and environmental
As you
and
support.
water quality.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
water quality and environmental are
and I just want to give you an example why. Because it's another community I work with right now, same exact thing.
Protected.
They say that, natural resources, better water quality and all that, and then we said, okay, here's how you implement that, and gave them 4 or 5 examples, and everybody went, whoa, I don't want to do that. So I do, higher standards with stormwater is a way to have cleaner water, which is a huge challenge to have any stormwater for sites on this island, right? And one of the biggest pushbacks we get in redevelopment is, when you redevelop a site, why do I have to bring in stormwater treatment that was never done before?
That should be
Okay.
announced, I mean, that's a must, that's a have to.
I'm glad that's my point, is some people, when they hear the how you implement it, don't like the answer of how to implement it, so.
But I also,
Okay.
but I also think that because we are at ground zero,
Mhm.
that whole aspect of things has to change in
Right.
a rebuild. And now is the time to do it, because we have been decimated in so many areas. So now, put it all back in, put it in the right way, not the old way that it's been.
Okay. It's just when we get into the debate, it's, okay, now you're talking more expense for a small site that's trying to redevelop, right? It's that give and take of what do we ultimately mean by that? And so that's why I just want to.
But this would just ultimately back up Southwest Florida Management District, right? Because you're going to have to do that anyway. Maintain your own stormwater, maybe you go further into treating your own stormwater for them. At least I don't know. If you can get that.
No, I mean, I'm saying some communities are adopting higher standards beyond that to ensure better water quality. If they don't think that those minimum standards do, but
Okay. So there's minimum standards.
these minimum standards are,
That Swiftmud's going to make you do.
right, but when you
This
use,
could be.
right, but when you use language like natural environment and protect the water quality at the highest possible, whatever, then what does that mean? And that's what I'm saying is that translates into, are you going to have your own stormwater standards? Are you going to have, there's 10 other things that you could do, but that's
What
just.
falls into that public benefit realm? Another tool in the toolbox?
Okay. That's why I wanted to have that conversation, because yes, better water quality equals more cost. What's the give and take? Those are all important things to think about when we use this language, that's all.
But I think we're talking very high level as the vision for the paradise that we live in, right? And when we see that, I don't think I guess I'm grappling with, we need maximum flexibility and the restrictions that we impose, we don't want them to be so burdensome, but we do need to ensure that there is some level. I personally, when we've gone through all of these things, everything that I've struggled with is, how does the comprehensive plan as it now sits, which I really actually like it, I think it's a pretty solid thing, but it doesn't immediately deal with the realities that we have, that we no longer can work on the bottom floor, right? These are the things that we're having to deal with. And I think that the example that was given with being able to activate the bottom floor for some things under certain circumstances is brilliant, because we've been struggling with that by trying to exclude parking, for example, from FAR, right? That's one of the ways that we've been trying to work within the rules that we have, but to also encourage some development. So I'm very much in favor of that sort of thing. I think that the general comp plan that we have with those tweaks the vision is good. I get concerned that if we become too restrictive, there will be unintended consequences, which is what we've seen with, for example, the development agreement. Probably I'll get rambling there, but I just feel like we need to be concerned that we don't create a problem where there isn't one that exists.
Do you see this language that was mentioned creating a problem?
No, I think what I brought up the point just to, what does that language mean to you, right? And scenic views is actually another segue point of that. What does that actually mean? Comp plan currently talks about scenic views, and that the way that that's been implemented has morphed over the last 20 years. So in order to write land development codes that are consistent and have the direct policy, those are types of verbiage that I'm just asking the question, what do you mean by that? So that we can translate it.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. I'm not trying to jump ahead, but
Sure.
since we're talking about that first paragraph, scenic views, again, to me, that's, if I'm a developer, I can come in and say, well, I'm following comp plan because I'm 35 stories, nobody's getting a better scenic view than me. Maybe it needs to say scenic views for all, or something along those lines to help.
Well, yeah, and what does that mean though? Is that through beach access? Is that through corridors? Is that
Well,
through
that's,
development?
that would fall under the land development code, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be?
But view corridors is the way that this has been interpreted now.
Right.
By all the developers, right? That's been.
Well, no, I think the interpretation of view corridors specifically has changed. And what are we allowing for sites? How do we protect those corridors? And that's fine, those decisions can be made. I'm just saying, to write appropriate codes, it helps if you have more specifics, but not too specific in your policy. What does preserving view corridors mean, scenic corridors mean, right? We haven't actually ever defined that.
So what does what does scenic views mean?
That's
Whether
what-
it's view corridors or scenic views, but.
Right. And we don't have to do it here. I'm just saying, if we're keeping it here, let's make sure we also kind of put it in a little bit of a box in policy to then dictate to the code how that should be done.
And to be fair, a lot of that's already been in the prior conversation and in the fact that, there are aspects that we've been trying to clarify throughout the process. It's about having those beach corridors even in a transportation master plan. We start off by actually recommending that you have specific beach access points in the comprehensive plan. Then we would instruct to scale back and put it, do a, recommendation and a transportation element for a master plan for community. And that then became a subcomponent of that you will put in a future workable master plan. And so, we're at the point where we're kind of coming full circle on a lot of the conversations on a lot of points. So, it's also why we're having the conversation today, right? I think these are valid questions. We need, I think we do need to make a determination right now about what we mean by scenic views. We mean by scenic views in a way that we've heard on some of these discussions with the public and saying, we want to make sure that, the height on the beach is lower. Or the setbacks are structured in a way that, hey, maybe it's not this building and then that's your view, and then this building, maybe it's this building and then this is your view and then that building. There are different ways to interpret it. We need better direction.
Scenic views have always been a thing for me because to your point earlier, the landscaping plan. Yeah, I've got these great scenic views below my building, but as soon as you require me to put all this landscaping in, you lose exactly what you were trying to gain anyway.
Sure.
Right.
So how do you word it in a way that it's something that will be, I hesitate using the word forever, but it would be something that people can enjoy, whether you're a resident or a visitor. A scenic view to me is something that everybody gets to enjoy, not just driving by in a car, and now the plants are so big you can't see it anymore.
So Dan, do you think that it's not really the view, but the access that's important?
I think access to me is more important. I mean, the view is going to be the view, especially if you start talking about some of the things we discussed a little earlier, being able to, after a coastal construction wall goes in, and now you close that view, that you're fighting against what, the comprehensive plan is fighting itself.
Yeah, and part of my point is when you put in a vision statement, you've raised the bar on that word, right? I don't want to get into all this word by word, but to us, the last sentence of that second paragraph is a really important one because that directs us those uses specifically we need to make sure of. So when you use the words scenic views, beach access, whatever it is, in your vision statement, it elevates it somewhat.
And I think, Mayor, you hit on a really, really good point with something that people are not to say, can see it driving by in a car, right? Something that, word that we've used in other plans, seen in other plans with smaller town communities is that human scale. So that eye level of what you enjoy, you're walking and bicycling, not that you're just driving back in a car. And that's a critical distinction of that human scale that maybe we can go back and tweak the wording on in the vision.
Yeah, it's the accessibility to the beach. I mean, that's our number one resource, right? That's what everybody comes here for. And to have access to that, being able to see it is great, but having access to it is far more important. because if you have access to it, you'll still be able to see it.
I think it's very difficult to guarantee view corridor because, you know, people that own the beachfront want privacy also. So they're going to put in the landscaping. They're going to not make it Sanibel where you can't see the house even, but you know, they are going to landscape and give themselves privacy. What is important to me, basically, is having the air corridor that brings the air through the island as opposed to wall-to-wall concrete buildings where you don't get any air moving to the other side of the island, I mean, you know, to the bayside. And I think that makes a huge difference. I mean, you know, it makes you a concrete wall down the entire beach is concerning for the rest of the island.
Hey, Jason, I think by scenic view, if you asked 9 out of 10 people who came to Fort Myers Beach, it's the view from the bridge.
Yeah.
That is a view that needs to be protected.
It is.
We all reacted to it in the recent case, and that view is a view that's shared by every person who ever comes to Fort Myers Beach.
That is kind of an assumption though, because a lot of us come from the south end.
Exactly.
Well, you're going to have a great view over that bridge.
We're getting a bigger bridge.
You'll have a taller bridge to view everywhere.
And nobody can build in front of you unless they close that pass. So,
There you go.
Don't give them any ideas.
Okay.
Good point.
Yeah.
John?
That's good.
Scott?
I'm good. I want to hear from everyone else.
Karen?
So, a couple of things. So, I know we did 3 different surveys and that type of thing. So there's 118 respondents. That's like 3% of our population that we're kind of basing all of our direction on versus, you know, and I know you advertised it, you got people in, that type of thing, but I think we need to take a broader view of this. You know, where's the economic development in any of this? Where is our economic engine and sustainability?
Same thing.
Because if we don't build back, then what happens to our paradise? What happens to our town? It won't be a town anymore. I mean, we've been lucky enough to have the state so behind us and grants and loans and don't have to pay back and all kinds of things that have happened because of the hurricane. The hurricane put us in this spot and we've been lucky enough to get all this, but those, I mean, that access is pretty much gone. So what do we need to incorporate in all of this planning and development that is going to make us economically sustainable? And that I haven't seen anything touched on.
I mean, some of the feedback, we went back to the comments, economic redevelopment and development was part of those comments, right? That was one of the things. I think it speaks to Scott's point about having better tools to build some back. Because the reality is right now you're going to have a little bit of both, right? You want tools for both. Bigger, consolidated development, I won't say bigger, but different types of development, which I think you have with some other examples you've recently passed. And then, but not forget about the smaller lots. Not everybody's going to buy up 3 acres of land and build a bigger development, right? We don't want that to happen everywhere. We want the smaller.
Nobody wants that.
Right, that's your small town character. I read your personal services, that speaks to that. And I think that
Yeah,
can
but
be-
Jason, let me jump on that because Karen raised an absolutely vital point that was on my list too. If you look at your word cloud, you don't have to go back to it, but there's streams and complaints all over it, which is the way that people talk, and it's fine, you put them in a category. Then there's a little tiny thing under mangroves that says taxes. So it's disproportionate in my mind to the economic realities and the viability of what we're trying to create, and not only create but sustain and make it independently viable economically. And I wonder if your questions had enough bias in them around the consequences of these dreams versus the impact both economic and personal financial commitments have to be made, and the incentives the town needs to create in order to stimulate that kind of a conversation. And it's a myriad. Communities have to deal with this, and you know this, sir, all the time. You know, where you put a fire hydrant, it affects how much your insurance is on your home. There's a million things like that out there. And I'll say one other thing to her point that I don't know if we can do anything about, but it's reality. If you look at last January, if you look at the tax rolls, look at all the parcels on the island, You look at the vacant lots, as they sit today, 3 years now after the storm, the vacant lots. There's a capped taxable value on those of over $300 million, and nothing is happening on these lots. So their homestead exemptions have been extended years now with nothing happening, and some of them are for sale. And they still benefit, and the town is paying the price for not having the ability to either incent something happening there or inflict some sort of a consequence for that tax conversation you're inevitably going to have here in the next few months, that those are sitting, in my mind, economically unviable in their current state. So how do we, back to Karen's point, bring something like that in here to fore so that there's an accountability for the economic viability of these decisions we're making?
Just before, can I add to say, my question was going to be similar to what you're asking. To me, we're talking a lot about commercial, but we're not looking at residential, right? To me, residential is sustainability. Commercial is viability, right? If you're looking at long-term. Without residents and people and homesteads and things here, you can have all the commercial you want, but there's going to be nobody here to support it. Unless you want to go to a complete tourist town, which I don't think anybody wants to do.
You need commercial for the residents.
You need,
you want
you need a both.
It's a balance.
You need a both. But if we're talking about sustainability of an island, you're not going to see these developments for 10 years. If we can't sustain for 10 years, those developments are building for nothing, or they're not even going to start because there's not enough sustainability to help the viability. And if we can figure out a way to entice people, to your point, to start building, whether it's single-family homes, whether it's Airbnb, whatever it's going to be, to help with that tax base, the commercial's never going to come. You look at things like Matanzas that's been approved forever. It's never coming. They've been approved for 10 years. It's never coming. Why? Because the numbers aren't right, or this or that. But you have to have people here, but to your point, Scott, you have to have the commercial to support as well, right? And I think the commercial will come if you can attack the residential portion of it.
So how do we incentivize that?
Exactly. The money is real, and it's sitting there.
So, first to our council member Woodton's question regarding survey. People are noting these things where they feel it's missing. Then to Solomon's question, whether or not there's enough bias in the survey. Try to keep the survey as biased as possible.
Let's use the word to make a point. I get your point. I know what you're trying to do.
But to us, one of the reasons why we have the conversation is because there is that policy aspect, that's an incongruency between what they want and what the actual reality is, right? That it's a purpose of this body to kind of cut through the butter. And cutting through that butter means that it has to deal with those difficult decisions on what it means to be able to come to the fact that these businesses, when these developers, when we were interviewing developers at the beginning of the process, not even with this, but in writing the comprehensive plan, they said, we need to make sure that we have a certain amount of density, we need a certain amount of people. That's why we came up with these nodes the way we did. So we were attacked at the beginning to come up with something that we believe, based on our research and our interview, to be viable. We were then asked to scale it down from a density standpoint. It comes back full circle to the questions we're having now. What is the appropriate amount? And there are consequences to that lowering of density, because it's about having that customer base and that commercial, and it's a cyclical process when it comes to this. Now, what we've recommended is that you have those nodes in a way that has that flexibility, the ability to try to drive that investment back, to have that minimum critical mass. Now, I want to bring up something as well that we brought up very, very early on in the process that speaks to what Anita's prior question was on the residential areas. We noted to you very early on in the process that you had a population trend that did not coincide with your housing trend. Your houses, the amount of expected housing based on Schindler Institute research and others went up, your population went down. And we tied that back into looking further at how many Airbnbs you guys had, and then also look at your transient residential regulations. That's why those aspects were modified in the comprehensive plan and our recommendation how to address them with the LDR in the future. That your inability to give that variation for the transient residential meant that you had a supply and demand market shift toward those Airbnb that was disproportionate. But guess what? If those Airbnbs, it's someone's second property, and it's an investment property, where are the residents? What are the residents paying? Well, they're paying more. And so those properties at the investment property work, they have to be able to get that rent in order to pay the mortgage or pay that investment or get that return to justify them putting that cash in the first place. It's all part of a larger picture that we had spoken about from the very beginning of this process. So, to your point of how do you get that aspect, you have to embrace the fact that there's certain part of the town that you are going to lean into that tourism industry for that transient residential to begin to come back in a different form, so that it continues to provide that support for the restaurant, while simultaneously loosening it up so that it doesn't have that impact on the housing prices that we've already seen and which is reflected in your demographic and housing trends that we know at the very beginning of this process. Rule changes and those aspects of the land use we recommended were designed to try to simultaneously tackle that aspect by building in the critical mass and density that support the businesses while trying to protect your single-family neighborhood, particularly in light of the preemption against Airbnb that the state has. The only way to address that, given the preemption at the state statute level, is to try to see how your policies can influence certain market decisions, including how rent for hotels and motels can be altered, because there's a reason that Airbnb market exists. We're really,
Does anybody think that's not working though? I mean, we've got the weekly rental rates where I now live on Delmar Street, and there's little homes popping up right, left, and center. They're building them.
And that's the concern that I have. Since day one, Eddie, no offense, but your focus has always been on densities and how do we make the commercial aspect work within a residential island. And then you say we're diminishing residential population. How do we correct that?
Yes.
You just talked about market manipulation. How do you manipulate the market to entice people to come here as a resident while you're still supporting the commercial business? So far, I've only heard it one way. No suggestions going the other way.
You want to try it a little differently? Talk about that.
Or at least balancing it. Because to your point, if you keep going down the trend that we're going, there won't be residents. It's going to be a tourist island only. That's right. And I don't know that anybody, I will tell you specifically, that's not the trend I want to see. I would prefer to see it start to go the other way, because this island has been successful because it has been balanced. And if you can keep that balance, so how can you do what you're tasked to do to keep that balance?
The balance is from having those specific areas, but also because of that it doesn't intrude in those residential areas, and then allowing those regulations in the residential area to be constructed in a way where they can rebuild in the manner that we've been speaking about for most of this meeting.
I mean, the challenge is the investor uses the build-back provisions just like a home property owner would, right? And the property values, or the sale price, I should say, maybe not the value, but sale price has gone so crazy on some of these. And part of that's anticipation of the investment part. So when you're selling your lot for $1 million, you don't care who buys it, you want the $1 million, right? So that's the challenge, and I think originally when we talked about this, goes back 3 or 4 years now, is creating additional supply. It was such a tight market for hotel rooms and motel rooms and that sort of thing. You've done some of that, there's opportunities there, but that lowers prices. That's not what the hotel providers want either, right? So it's the supply and demand thing that you're trying to unwind a little bit of the trend that's actually a statewide and a national trend. And the challenge in that is, how do you do that? Because we're limited by the state.
So I guess here's what I'm trying to get, and I'll just talk about cases that we've already had.
Sure.
Right now, the people I talk to, they're lived in neighborhoods for decades, who thought they were living in a neighborhood that was protected. They now feel that there's no protection. Another neighborhood thought they were living in a neighborhood that was protected, which we talked about. Everybody was talking back 2 years ago. No one's ever going to buy up land, commercial, residential land, and convert it to commercial. Guess what? It just happened. What's going to stop that? What is in here that's going to stop that? Because if I'm looking to make this my residence, and I'm just gonna talk, what guarantees do I have through this comp plan that I'm not gonna have one of those two scenarios in my backyard?
Well, if you stick to the land use that's in the comprehensive plan and it says residential and you don't vary from that, then that piece of property is residential. We talked about earlier about allowing the commercial uses in a residential area. Jason's response was, well, once you make it commercial, it's not gonna go back. So you have to specifically delineate those areas and stick to it. We honestly say that we are sticking to decisions in the comprehensive plan. I'm being really, really frank here. But can we actually say that? If the answer is no, then it's not a problem with the comprehensive plan. It's a problem of adhering to the comprehensive plan. And no amount of me trying to wiggle around the comprehensive plan use as your consultant is going to change that fact.
So your residential neighborhoods are delineated. They always have been. There's always been about the protection of them, and that's primarily single family, right? And there's commercial nodes, and there's areas that are transitioning their residential in a commercial node. You've always had that. And so that doesn't answer the question you're asking, which is almost a nearly impossible question, which is how do you fix Airbnb, single family, when they're so protected, and we can't change anything. We've tried. We have the registration program. We try to enforce. We try to enforce the enclosures below. All that stuff has been an enforcement issue and process. It's a market thing that's really difficult. So the way that we originally said to address it is clarify and create opportunities for redevelopment that Scott was talking about. Opportunities for, they're coming to you now. You've approved several of them. Those will hopefully rebalance that somewhat, but we're not even back to where we were from number of units yet, right? So I don't know that you're going to see that until we get back there. If that even works, right? It's theoretical. So I get your struggle, but I think what Eddie's talking about is what this plan are still delineating the difference between the primarily single-family residential and everything else. That has always been done. There's encroachment with things next to each other, and whether they impact noise and air and all that stuff of those residences, but the land use lines are drawn, and they will be, I would assume, be maintained. You're not going to see commercialization go down the street.
You answered my question.
Does that make, yes?
You answered my question.
Does it?
I think I knew the answer to the question before I asked it. I just wanted to see maybe if you guys that do this for a living had a better answer. But
the answer is the tools you're talking about, put them in place.
No, I know.
And you're doing that. You are doing that.
Yeah. Now there is one last aspect to Jim's question, and that's on vacant lots. That is one that usually in other communities is controversial, and it takes a lot of, I think, political willpower. And that is to look at things like vacant lot ordinances and look to work with your city attorney to see, to review state law on what you can do in terms of second properties. Now, in Florida, it is actually more difficult because of how Floridian tax laws are written and what you can do as a municipality on those bases. I'm not a lawyer, so I have to defer to, the city attorney, but I can tell you that I know enough of it to tell you that there are certain nuances that causes you difficulty. You try to differentiate the properties a certain different way at times from a taxation perspective. So what then is the other aspect then is look at it as in vacant lot ordinances. Are there punitive measures that are attached to that? They're not popular. Sometimes people are like, I have to maintain it, I have to fence it, those are the basic minimum.
Tax increases are popular, so.
Right. But those are things that you can discuss from a policy standpoint if that is a concern. It's a matter of how far you want to go.
Sure, understood.
And Mayor, I do want to say, I know you said I answered the question, but there are examples around the state. There's a couple communities that have reversed that trend, and part of that was at build out. And as they developed and filled in the commercial and all the stuff you're talking about, it did somewhat transition back the other way. It was painful for a while. It was mostly short-term rental, and it has transitioned back to more residents. So
I think
it's an ebb and flow.
It's going to be tough. I mean, there's
absolutely
Tallahassee that everybody knows. You're trying to serve home rule when it comes to short-term rentals. I think if it was up to Tallahassee, you'd have a nightly street. The entire island would be a nightly street, which would completely obliterate a residency. on this island.
Yes.
Because, how do we combat that, right? Tallahassee level, people have been combating it forever.
Right.
We're seeing it a lot. I'm sure my fellow councilors in the LPA are seeing, as people are investing, they're like, wait a minute, I know I bought on a monthly street, why can't you just change it so it's a weekly street? So you're seeing that pressure. How can we plan for the future to push back on that? Is there a way to do that? I guess would be the better way.
Well, I mean, I would always encourage, I have for years as your consultant, advising the enforcement of the current rules and sticking to that. That helps protect those streets. People don't move out because they got tired of the transition. If the transition wasn't allowed and we continue to enforce, and I think you're doing that. So that is a big deal, enforcing the regulations you have to protect the streets that want to stay residential. And I think we're lucky that we have the regulations that we have in place from a short-term rental perspective, because I live in a community that didn't do anything, and now that's all we see. And every house is being sold to short-term rental or is transitioning, and it's unfortunate. So we're lucky we got what we got, and I think you have to enforce it, and then you'll help stem that tide a little bit.
And part of that enforcement that is to really carefully consider if you want to limit the category for which you will allow yourself to grant a variance. Some cities do this. It's in their code. They say we will only grant a variance if X, Y, Z is met, and only if those are met. Maybe something that you want to think about, maybe something you want to do, maybe it's not. But I think, given what we're hearing, it merits that question of if you want to set additional guidelines yourself, so that if you get pushed back, you point back that this is the policy decision that we have adopted as a community.
But again, that would be covered in the land development code.
That would be covered in the land development code. It would have a certain route in a comprehensive plan, but you normally don't put it in a comprehensive plan.
Karen? What else? Vice Mayor?
Just a couple clarifying questions to help shape the discussion here. This tight timeline that you've been referencing, that's just with respect to the comprehensive plan, correct? So what's the timeline for the LDC, the land development code, post comp plan?
So we've drafted sections that we're still editing and working through, and as policy tweaks happen, we'll go back and re-review some of that. So as the comp plan finishes, I would like to think have some draft of chapters or sections to start bringing forward to you by the end of the year. And so I would say by the spring, hopefully we can somehow adopt the updated land development code.
And so this next question is potentially more germane for the LDC, but it probably impacts the comp plan discussion as well. This Senate Bill 180, it sounds like it's going to be signed. I just want to take it up 10,000 feet. In the environmental world, there's a term called no more stringent than. And we see states that will enact no more stringent laws to make sure that their regs aren't any more stringent than the feds. Is this in essence affect our comp plan discussion in the sense that our comp plan can be no more stringent than our existing comp plan? Is that in essence what they're discussing in Tallahassee?
Yeah, it applies to land development codes too. I mean, there's many communities that are going line by line in their land development codes right now saying, oh, if we change this or that, or there's a community right now that's trying to repeal a new code and go back to an old one, and they've realized, what am I doing if I do that? So there's a lot of nuances to the 180 and how that works. So we, as a code right, are trying to make sure, even rearranging things and reorganizing things so it's more legible, so the average person can read it.
You're doing this in anticipation that Senate Bill 180 will be signed?
Yes.
And
we want to do it anyway, right? So I want to be able to explain to you why a code that got moved around or reorganized, you're going to ask me, is it more or less restrictive? Even if that doesn't get signed, you're going to ask.
So when we get to the LDC part of the discussion, if Senate Bill 180 is passed, we'll have to look at it through the lens of no more stringent than our existing LDC?
Right. And a lot of the conversations we're having are the other direction, which is let's create opportunities for redevelopment, more realistic landscape buffer requirements. I think in the code right now, it's an old Lee County code language that requires like a 20-foot buffer along a sterile boulevard. There's no room for a 20-foot buffer in anybody's property, right? Things of that nature, those are not more restrictive, it'd be less restrictive, but more common sense.
But today you're really trying to get some sort of agreement on the visioning statement, correct? Is that what you're going
Correct. The comp plan vision statement, and I raised that issue about priorities, right? It helps identify some of those. We don't want to get into the granular part of it, but This helps guide the rest of the plan and policies, which then help the implementation of the land development code.
Very good, thank you.
If you said you wanted an FAR of, if you decided something else, we need to know that, right? If you want 20-story, which you don't, I'm just using examples. We need to know that today because we've gone too far to change after this. So let's get this thing tweaked and then adopt it.
Thank you.
Yep.
John?
In the visioning statement, the last paragraph kind of bothers me. I don't find it very welcoming. This is our slice of paradise. We are willing to share it, but only. To me, something as simple as, this is our slice of paradise and we share it in balanced ways. Contribute positively towards our overall quality of life.
That's excellent, excellent.
All right. Okay.
Thought I knew we were going to jump through this screen.
Because that's a very good point. That was good.
Scares the hell out of you.
I know.
Now you're about to walk.
To Big Dan to scare the hell out of you.
You're succeeding.
I do jump a little bit. Yeah.
We share it.
That TV's loud. I think it's got to probably.
That was bad ear.
Yeah. What else you got, John?
That'll do it.
Since we're wordsmithing, I did have one little wordsmith, very tiny. Use the word doctors. Could we use the word medical services? Because I think we're looking at physical therapy, we're looking at pharmacy, we're looking at dental, we're looking at chiropractor, urgent care, the whole package. So just a little piece on it.
Good. Yep. Making those notes right now.
Well, back when we came to town and put the LBC and the comp plan in action, there was no vacant land on Fort Myers Beach. If you wanted to build a new home, you had to buy a house, tear it down, and rebuild it. So we're in the exact opposite today, where we have all these vacant land, and we need to do something to help our neighbors not have rats, not have bugs, not have, standing water next door, creating flies and mosquitoes. We need to do something to create what these lots need to look like. They need to be clean, they need to be mowed weekly, they need to have trash picked up. I mean, when I walk my dog 3 times a week, I go up to people's yards and pick up the limbs and put them all out in the stack. But that's not my job. We need to have the landowners taking care of these properties. I mean, we have tons of pools on this island that have no fence around them, that any kid can fall into and may never be seen again because it's all muck and no clear water. We need to protect the people who come here. I mean, on our street we had 4 septics completely open. And, I turned them in. It took 6 months for anything to happen. And that's ridiculous. I mean, that's an animal walking on the street at night and falling in these holes. A kid running through an empty lot. And the things, what they're becoming is they're becoming parking lots. And, like the vacant house next door had, and I'm at the end of the street, they had 6 cars parked in the lot, and they leave all their trash there. So we need to have something where we are enforcing and regulating based on something that's in our plan, because it wasn't an issue then. And now we have a huge issue. Right. And what also is happening, I mean, when is the limit on these condemned buildings to either move forward or tear down? Because, people that come, they go, why does it still look like this? Why isn't, if you're going to have a building that you're going to redo, at least put windows in, put paint it, make it look nice. Don't make it look like it's falling down. And that's the thing that, we have to beautify what we have, and we are looking still condemned, and we need to change that look. Is there something that we can put into the comp plan to eradicate that?
Yeah, normally, from a comp plan standpoint, it's really just having a single line about community standards, where you're talking about really more on a 2-pronged basis. The first step is actually having in your code of ordinances something like vacant lot or maintenance standards. And then the other aspect is for the mayor and council to have a budget that provides for a code enforcement officer to actually enforce those aspects and have those enforcement mechanisms. So, two aspects of that. Usually isn't rooted in a comprehensive plan beyond directing staff to have some aspect of that if in the land development regulation.
Can we get some response from the town of
Well,
what's
I
happening?
think that stuff already exists, now it just comes down to enforcement, quite honestly. I think that there's already mechanisms in place to make that happen.
But after 3 years, is it time to start enforcing?
Well, I would argue that it has been going on, but I think Eddie's point, it comes down to finances too. It comes down to resources and finances, so,
Even property rights too.
Well, but you don't have a right to have 5-foot weeds
No,
on
I
the
agree,
property
No.
and garbage and a parking
Open
lot.
pools.
Yeah, getting paid parking and stuff like that. I mean, it's crazy.
The ordinances exist, and our code, even before I got here, there's a lot of improvements, I think, made in how the code enforcement team is able to go and enforce those, and working with the magistrate, and actually working with different magistrates now on different things to make sure we're able to tackle those things more effectively and quicker. We've got a list of all those properties, and we're working our way through that list, enforcing it all the time. Yes, more resources would be very helpful, and we'll have those discussions with the council when necessary. But we're tackling it, I assure you.
Yeah, that's great, thanks.
and I think people forget, Jane, that you do have property rights, right? You have an ability to go through and say, I don't like the decision that you think you've made. And people are choosing, as we saw with the bee house down on the north end of
Absolutely.
They chose to take it to the fullest extent they could, because they could. At some point, you've got to hope people will do the right thing, because it's the right thing to do, and they're required to do it.
Right. But I think if education, again, to the public says it's time to clean up, it's time to make decisions, if we could get that out there, maybe people will move on cleaning up, and so that our neighborhood, with all of our beautification of new homes being built, that the street looks like it's a livable street instead of, a rat-infested, we're getting our raccoons back, we're getting iguanas like crazy, it's, and, yeah, I could go on, I don't know, thanks.
Well, that's it.
That's it. That answers from you.
I'm going to feel like I'm piling on to comments by Scott, Tim, John, James, Jim, here, and yourself, Mayor. But what I see, I feel like all this public input, I could have just made that list off the top of my head, because it's restaurants, medical care, traffic. That's all stuff we already do. So what I see is like a wish list and aspirations, but are they really achievable for all these reasons that have been brought up, like the economics? So I feel like there might be sort of a conflict between this somewhat superficial vision statement. What is the economic reality? Like, I see, well, we want to have a vision of 1 story over flood, but we're not seeing any developments coming in with 1 story over flood. And the reason is it's not financially viable, right? We all know that. We're talking about that. So I think we need to see if we can find a way to incorporate, and I know we've talked around it already, I'm piling on to what's already been said, but can the comprehensive plan somehow incorporate the idea that we want to encourage, the development that does happen is going to happen due to economics, and so what we want to do is steer it to our goals as best we can, and we have to make compromises. Right? So we want to both develop the property in a nice way, and maintain view corridors and so forth. But I observed that prior to Ian, the barber shops closed, the dry cleaner closed, the 1 doctor's office closed, even without Ian. So already there wasn't, maybe as mentioned, we're transitioning too much to transient type populations, and we people that are permanent year-round residents are fewer and fewer. And these types of businesses that really cater to communities really can't survive. And as Jane said, and I guess another thing that struck me too in all of these public input, I didn't hear anything about, like what to me makes a community also includes like public schools or schools, religious institutions, churches, so forth. I didn't hear anything about that. And so I really just saw quite a bit of superficial stuff that I could just take out. Honestly, that's
I mean, I'm yeah. You know, you heard me give you a blood at the beginning, like, it's not a surprise. You hear me repeat that a lot. It's because exactly, I had the same exact observation that you had, that, hey, this is all stuff we've heard before. And some of it on the economic aspect of stuff we've revised before. We said, we know these things to survive. We are recommending a certain critical mass. We're instructed to go a certain way with the density. We are simply following that directive. Doesn't change our professional recommendation, but we are trying to make sure that moving forward, the language is the way you guys, have, wanted to go. I mean, you guys have heard me enough times to know that I haven't really changed a lot of things. You may bring up other items, and I'm like, okay, let's try a little bit differently, or here's the potential solution, you want me to proceed this way, right? That's been a lot of our conversation. But on that particular aspect, for the last 2.5, 3 years, you haven't really seen me change my tune at all. What my professional recommendation is about that critical mass, about that density. It's about what we know the community does want. Well, why aren't we getting it there? Now, today we also talked about other tools like, the council members noted that, hey, we have to look at the CRA aspect. We go back and actually provide additional policy to say, are these other tools like the CRA that you should evaluate further, so that you can take that not from an LDR standpoint, but from a staff directive standpoint on things. So I think there's the aspect that there's a reinforcement that as a town we should be heading in that direction. So we should look at these other tools, because it just reinforces the fact that, hey, we thought it was important, we heard it was important, and they're telling us again.
Where is the CRA discussion in Tallahassee? Is that, I haven't heard
that died.
It did die?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they couldn't reconcile the Senate and the House version. I don't know about that in detail, but
Well,
time limit, right?
It starts and then in 3 years from now, so time is ticking.
Yeah. But yeah, points were well taken.
Leading off of his comments, I think that is a big concern if you're trying to provide space for a dentist and a doctor and all those things. People are not going to drive from off-island to come to these dentists and doctors and physical therapists when they can get it off-island and not have to come to this crazy place with traffic. So, I mean, like, I used to own the curves here, and it was not viable because the tourists, because of their plan of how they did it, the tourists would take over it, and in the summertime it was dead because everybody goes up north. So it's very hard to have a viable small business that is a service business or medical business that would provide, I mean, a tourist is only going to come here if they have a cap fall out of their tooth or something like that to go to the dentist. You got to be able to sustain on the, however many people, 4,000 people that live here year round. 3,000. I mean, it's just getting so small.
Yeah, I think our goal obviously is to provide the tools if that's wanted, right? And if there is viability to that. It admittedly is challenging. If somebody wanted to come back and somebody wanted to open a new facility like you're talking about, it is challenging to get that started, especially today.
Well, especially today, because everybody has had to move off island for their services because there's no services here. So
make it not so difficult and see what happens and encourage it. And that's what you do through your comp planning and land development codes. Encourage specific uses, and hopefully it'll work.
Right. Agreed.
The other aspect then is on and off island transportation. I get the sense that some of these desire to have things closed is because getting on and off the island, you know, think about the time that you're spending going over the bridge. That's what it's really about. It's about not having that third bridge, about that one-way in or out. It's about that matter of convenience, whether it's perceived or not. And the result of that perceived convenience then is, you know what if it was on the island? Oh, I could save all this time and the frustration of not having to go off the island because it's right there. That's the other way of looking at it as well.
Agreed, if you have to change once they've already changed, I mean, you know, people are going on
Yeah.
change.
And here's the reality, we were given this task ultimately to either reconfirm what a lot of us keep saying we already knew, because we've done public engagement before all this, beforehand, right? Or is there an entirely new thought process and direction? And it's not a bad thing necessarily that you're hearing the same thing. It means we're in the direction that we thought we were 2 years ago. So that's what we were tasked with last fall. Go out and make sure. And if you hear the same thing, then we'll move forward.
Jim?
So 2 quick echoes, back to Councilor Woods' points here for a minute about your survey. I don't think it's statistically significant based on the numbers you got versus the overall demographics. And clearly, by your own admission, the 40 and under crowd was not represented here at all. So I don't want to over-amplify that what you provided us is somehow an echo that these words are right based on our community's feedback, because we don't have that other than by transactions that we go through. Do you agree with that?
I would say that we can only work with what we have, and this is what we have, so we are making our statements based on what we have. It's a valid consideration that, you know, that's why we put out there full transparency that we didn't have that group. It's not that we didn't try to reach that group, and not that we didn't have that group in person, did not reflect in the survey, doesn't mean they're not reflected in the in-person engagement. So.
I would just back up and say the methodology was sound. The results may not cite
You say you can only work with what you have, and to be respectful, it's your job to go get what you need. So I'll just leave that there where it sits. Secondly, back to the next to last paragraph there on her comment about economic viability. I think when you read Fort Myers Beach, of the future is resilient, and immediately throw Ian in there, people think about destruction, and they think about the will of the people and the commitment and the culture around here, and all that is absolutely true. But I think there needs to be something in there that we have an aspiration to be both structurally, culturally, and economically resilient, so that there's a purposeful commitment that we're going to pay attention, that we have to sustain ourselves. And what that means and how that feels and how much commitment and sacrifice that takes to get to that point, those debates should happen. We're doing them now, transaction by transaction. I don't know we've done them without supports of having to make a yes or no decision on a development right now. And I think it's a conversation. It's back to what some of these people were saying is we have to teach as well as decide, because it's only when people understand that what you're trying to teach them and the reason and rationale, they become receptive audiences. And there's an economic model here that's not well understood in how it sustains itself. Because we've had the fortune of what the work this group has done and getting us the resources from the state that we wouldn't be here without what they've done. Now we have to stay here because of what we do. And I'll just leave that with that and get some feedback on that ad.
Okay. No, I think you're right on. I mean, it's
So the mayor and council wanted to add the word economic and social resiliency in addition to the the wording that we have up there.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been a fan of it, like using one specific instance. We all know that. We're all going to live with that the rest of it.
Right.
People going forward, they're not going to know. I mean, people coming down never even heard of Hurricane Charlie, right? So 20 years from now, they're going, what was Hurricane Ian? Because this island's going to look completely different.
Right.
So to be specific on one storm, I think you can.
Yeah, we can leave that off.
Your natural events, I think that's there, but I think showing in the vision statement that we want to take an economic stance to make sure that should we have to ever deal with this again, that we're able to do it, because we might not be lucky next time. We might not be able to get that help, or the state could be in a totally different economic state that we don't have that ability to help. So through reserves and things like that, we're going to make sure. So I think that's a great idea. Having it in there. Anita? You're up.
You're on mute.
She muted.
She's speechless.
And she's doing
She's
something
having her
else.
jackass coffee.
Ask Don.
She's speechless.
She might be frozen.
There you go.
If I could,
Go ahead.
if I could just throw a couple things in.
I didn't see you were up there, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Just a couple things. I agree with everything said. And, I won't pile on or add to too much. The couple things that hit me, I realize this is sort of aspirational visioning, but to me, it's not the Fort Myers Beach of the future. It's Fort Myers Beach is safe, right? I mean, we want to attract investors. We want to attract people to come back. We want to attract visitors, but also residents. There are residents or former residents who drive down the island and say, should I build or not? And some of the change points and some of the enforcement, I realize we're doing all that, but to me, it's a little bit more of let's drive a stake in the ground. It is safe. It is multi-generational community where residents and visitors can grow older. I can't tell you how many people I know that are just visitors to Fort Myers Beach my whole life. So I think those are kind of key points to put there together, and that those visitors might be a full family or multi-generational families that continue to come. I'm one of those who've been coming here for 40-some years. So I think those are key points. I think the other thing is, I think I heard Dan say something about kind of keying in on Ian. It's probably not Ian. It's Ian. It's Milton. It's Irma. It's Helene. And so we're trying to build resiliency around Mother Nature or the environment. We're trying to take the environment that we love and enjoy, preserve it, and build resiliency into the community such that we don't have to do these things again. We don't have to continue to have these conversations after every storm. And so I think those are key points. The other couple things I heard, I don't know how we do it, but incentives, certainly, I work with developers all over the country, in fact, even across Canada in some cases, and you can incentivize growth. You can incentivize rebuilding, and so don't know how we do it, don't know if we do it, if we have the ability to do it at the state level or even the federal level. I think those are also key opportunities for us. But again, overall, I think it sounds great. Love all the comments and support all of it.
Thanks, Don.
Me too.
You're up, Anita.
I agree with what everybody has said. I think the conversation has been very productive, and what Don just pointed out about driving the stake in the ground, making the statement more present tense, so that whether you're reading it today or 10 years from now, it's a statement of now, I think is important.
And we appreciate the discussion to have, like, as Jim noted, there are gaps in there, but we need to get what we would do. The only other option was to go door to door, and that would have cost much more than what the town had budgeted for us for. And so we are appreciative of the opportunity here to be able to sit down and tap your brains and say, this is what we heard from what we have. Can you verify for us if this is how you, as your elected and appointed officials within the community, the ones who have the day-to-day interaction with your residents, can you tell us anything more concrete or separate? And I think we were able to accomplish that today. And I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to take time to do that with us today.
Well,
I appreciate your patience, Eddie, because we have been around the block a few times, so thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed over the past little over 30 days we've been here is we've got a couple of different efforts going on at the same time. This is one which we're statutory obligated to do, and the other one that the town is doing is our strategic plan. We had still not as many responses as we'd like, but we had over 300 responses in the community in our strategic plan outreach, and we've had 2 community forums where we brought in members of the community to provide, basically working sessions to work through different things. So I'd like to share some of the strategic planning information, and we'll work with that team that's working that with us to link that up with you, Eddie and Jason. So maybe give you a little bit more data and a little bit more
that would be
feedback.
very helpful.
Well, that pretty much segues into what my comments were. When you look at this, we've been going through this for a long time, right? We can write anything we want on this piece of paper. Yep. If you don't adhere to it, it means nothing. You can put whatever word in there you want. It doesn't matter. Use the example of the school board. When we were sitting at the school board meeting, their vision statement said to create world-class schools. Well, we have one here, and they want to take it away. So does a vision statement really mean anything? And that's what I'm getting at with this. We can put whatever we want here, but if we don't abide by it, it really doesn't mean, to your point, you have to follow through with policymaking decisions, or this doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we're doing it. To me, I'm with you, Doug. I think every one of us could have sat down and drew up this vision statement. It's not far off from the original one. There's a few minor tweaks, right, based on today's circumstances, but it's pretty close to the same for the most part. Land development code changes are going to come, but again, all of it means nothing if you don't adhere to it. And I think, you know, nobody likes an armchair quarterback, right? So yes, we maybe only had 118 people, but if you're not willing to step up and say what your grievances are or what you like or don't like, you can't be heard. You know, we can't read your mind if you don't talk to us or you don't send us emails. So although it's a very low number that I don't think should dictate things, to Doug's point, this hasn't changed a lot. It's tweaked a little bit, but it's on us and the people that come after us to make sure that the exercises that we're going through for strategic planning, that you stick to those. And if you're not going to stick to it, then why even have it? And I think that's the kind of grumblings that we're hearing now. I think this was a very productive discussion. I think everybody's kind of moving in the same direction. I think as this time goes on, it kind of heals all wounds and it kind of brings things back to that center. And I think you're starting to see that happen, or things are kind of coming back down to the ground and working through some of these developments that are coming forward, and people are on the outside starting to understand where the community is. There's some flexibility, but it doesn't mean, you know, over flexibility, right? I mean, everybody tries to stretch, hurts themselves. But so it's been productive, but again, I think it goes back to we have to, as policymakers, both now and in the future, follow what we're trying to accomplish here after a devastating event. So I appreciate your efforts in doing this. Hopefully you got enough information. Is there anyone else that has any comments before we wrap this up?
Mayor, I'd like to throw out an idea. It's really not a comp plan idea, but a lot of what was talked about today was luring residents here and getting vacant lots built on. In 08, 09, I represented a community that had a lot of vacant houses because of the housing crash. The community came up with a program where they had a down payment assistance, and the amount that was agreed upon was waived after 5 years if they still lived in the house. So maybe there's an opportunity. I know there's a financial impact if we looked at some of the town's fees for reviews, for permits, for inspection, and maybe give a credit for that, or take a second mortgage back or a lien of some kind and then waive it after a period of time if they still resided in it as a full-time resident.
Yeah, I think that's
just
I think anybody that has ideas up there to help incentivize and kickstart a stale market. I don't know if impact fees can be used for something like that. I not to throw more on your plate, but some sort of plan like that, I would certainly be in support of, because if you could get people to start building houses and they keep them there, there's a lot of people I've talked to who, you know, they went certain routes, but they had to live in the house for 2 years before they could sell it. And they did, you know, so they didn't want to do that. So, but that's not necessarily what we want here then, right? So any ideas that are out there, I think bring them forward to the LPA, bring them forward to the council, bring them forward to whoever will listen, because there's no such thing as a bad idea, except for one that isn't talked about.
Tax credit.
I mean, so
it has to be someone. There always something.
I mean, the 5 point, these are good ideas. These are things that, oh, sorry. I mean, one thing we want to know is that these are good ideas. Definitely, I know staff is marking them down. My recommendation is really also rooted in something I heard in person, and that is, and it was on the top floor of the library when she said it was like, we have told you guys this for 3 years. Some of us are not coming by to tell you again because we already told you. So that is an aspect of planning fatigue. The best thing that when you encounter something like that is to say, look, we're going to go ahead, we're going to adopt it, we're going to make sure we incorporate those ideas in the future, but let's get this first step done. Bit more public outreach is when you hear about planning fatigue, and that is literally words that in my face. It's like, you know, we already told you this. We already told you that. We've been telling you this for 3 years. You're not going to get anything more.
And just for you guys asked about timing, you don't have to wait 7 years to update a plan. If we run into something 2 years from now that housing issues, which we've talked about 3 years ago, frankly, and it became less of a requirement as far as incentivizing, but you can always add things and change things and change a focus or add a new priority.
Are there grants that we could go after for, rebuilding that would incentivize, if we could get grants that would pay their permits and things like that for new construction on a homesteaded property?
Standing here, I'm not going to, yes, maybe. There's lots of ways to deal with that. I think we have a whole list from 3 years ago that we talked about different programs. You guys were looking at housing. I think you're looking at starting a housing corporation or some type, and that goes back to that conversation 3 years ago. There's probably a list that we have somewhere that we went through all the different opportunities, programs that you could look at starting. We can recirculate that just so it's fresh in your mind.
We're not a first-time home buyer area, so that
Right.
there's not that out there for the banks and the government funds that are already provided. But, if we could come up with something that would be specific for long-term, homesteaded properties to get that motivated.
Anything else from you guys?
No, not for me.
Sure.
Yes,
Will,
please.
anything else you want to add?
All right. Okay, well.
John?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 11:17.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.